Our baby Isaac was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and needed surgery for a tumor that took up half his abdomen. His odds were the flip of a coin. But at Seattle Children's, he had one of the most experienced pediatric cancer surgical teams in the nation, and they brought him back to 100% himself. Maybe 200%.
For kids with the most complex surgical cases, it's not about beating the odds, it's about changing them. Find your hope at seattlechildrens.org.
Did our consultation with Seattle Nanny, and then we hired the first one that we met. So that wasn't my intent by any means, but we were just really impressed with her. I think I did meet with one after her just because I was like, let's make Seattle Nanny do their job.
For sure.
But yeah, and then Isabel was interviewing other places and we didn't want to let her go. So it wasn't a long process for us.
I would say honestly that the heart would be serving the individual person and looking at them in that clear way, and that what is it that they need? How can I make them better today and help set them up for success in whatever it is that they're going into tomorrow? If that means we need to slow down on a concept, make sure that it's understood. I just think that it's really just serving the individual in the way in which they're going to succeed, I think is the absolute heart of how this program runs and what makes it really, truly so successful.
Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Elaine Sulkin, and I am the publisher of ParentMap. Thank you so much for joining In Praise of Learning Differences, focusing on strengths and abilities with Dr. Ned Hallowell, founder of the Hallowell ADHD Centers. Thank you. For those of you not familiar with ParentMap, just like our other parenting media partners across the country, it's our business to build inclusive communities that inform, engage, and inspire parents like you and your family, while hopefully having plenty of fun as well. So thank you for coming. We're all extremely focused on how to better serve families, and being the parents and publishers that we are, we never settle for the status quo. And that means our deep community connections, family advocacy, and unique partnerships allow us to help build a better village for families. Before we begin, I just want to hit on a couple of housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded and republished for education and promotional usage. That's my dog Bailey, sorry. We will email everyone who registered a link for the recording as well. And we also ask that you use the Q&A at the bottom of the screen to send us your questions. We've received many great questions already, and have plenty of time to get to those. So again, I really want to thank our media partners, New York Family, Baton Rouge Parents, and NOLA Family in New Orleans. It's great to have people from around the country that partner with us. Also really want to thank our event sponsors, Seattle Children's Hospital, Seattle Nanny Network, Dartmoor School, St. Louise Parish School, St. Patrick Catholic School, and Washington College Saving Plans, known also as WA529. So welcoming Dr. Hallowell, many of you are familiar with his groundbreaking books, Driven to Distraction and Delivered from Distraction, co-authored with John Rady, and ADHD 2.0, brought attention deficit hyperactivity disorder to the attention of the general public and have sold millions of copies. After decades of experience working with people who have ADHD, Dr. Hallowell has long argued that the disorder is way too often misunderstood. And so with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Hallowell to join us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be with you all. Now, can they all see me or just hear me?
Yeah, they can see you and hear you. Yes.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Oh, good. So even though I can't see them. And let me just reiterate what was already said. Please, if you have questions, put them into the chat room because I'm going to spend a good amount of time responding to your questions. But to come to the topic, celebrating learning differences, to my way of thinking, we all have a learning difference. No two people learn exactly alike. And I summed this up at the end of a children's story I wrote for my daughter Lucy when she was about 6 years old. And the last 3 lines go like this: no brain is the same, no brain is the best. Each brain finds its own special way. And that really is what education and growing up ought to be. It ought to be a journey, an exploration, a search for your brain's special way. And that takes into account not just the conditions we diagnose like ADHD or dyslexia or dyscalculia or the slew of others, but it takes into account your emotional makeup, your genetic makeup, your physical makeup, all the things that combine your family traditions and heritage, your geography, your race, gender, religion, everything that goes into making up who you are and what your brain is. And I think when we categorize and even worse, stigmatize differences, we run a big risk of assuming that there is a good kind of brain, a normal kind of brain, and then a deficient kind of brain, and a not good kind of brain. And that stigmatization, that false dichotomy has really done a lot of damage. So just come back to the simple words: no brain is the same, no brain is the best. Each brain finds its own special way. And help your child, or yourself for that matter, not to mention your employees if you're a manager, or not to mention the people you coach if you're a coach, or the people who you teach guitar to if you're a music teacher. All of us have different brains, and the trick is to learn your own brain's special way. As a writer, it's common for us to talk about finding our voice. And that's every writer has his or her own voice. And I remember, teachers when I was in high school at Exeter saying, you're developing your own voice. And I thought, what do you mean? The way I talk? And they said, no, the voice that comes through when you write. And that's an expression of my brain. Well, all children should be encouraged to find their brain's special way, even develop a vocabulary for it. Now our vocabulary is very limited. It's largely pejorative. The time-honored categorization was smart and stupid, and that kind of summed up so-called learning differences. And then there were the real pejorative words that kids use when they hear they have a learning difference. They recognize that immediately as a euphemism, and they say, "You mean I'm a retard? You mean I'm stupid?" And they don't buy the way we've sort of euphemized it all. And so we have to really insist that these differences are simply that, they're differences, and we're all different. No two people learn exactly alike, just like no two people's handwriting is exactly alike. No two people's fingerprint is exactly alike. And your brain print, if you will, is as unique to you as your fingerprint. So let's get rid of this dichotomy of normal, abnormal, smart, stupid, gifted, not gifted, genius, not genius. I mean, all of these words that imply a stratosphere, a stratification of how your brain works. It's inaccurate. It's simply not right. Every brain is good at some things, and every brain is bad at some things, whether it's fielding ground balls or, drawing pictures. We all have certain talents, or the beginnings of talents, interests, or the beginnings of interests, and things that we avoid, things that we're not good at. And that's the way it should be presented to children, because it's the truth. And it's also a very liberating truth. So, while we're here today to celebrate learning differences, and I assume you all thought we were going to drill right down on ADHD and dyslexia, because that's sort of what I'm known for. But I want to make sure we start off with the broadest possible table, which is every brain out there. And every brain out there has its own unique way, and find it, as I said in the little poem, each brain finds its own special way, with the right encouragement, with the right permission, with a receptive environment for learning, as opposed to an inhibiting or normalizing, quote unquote, environment that tries to stamp out unique approaches to doing things, whatever they might happen to be. Well, that's my preamble, hoping you will all get on the page of every brain finding its own special way, and realize that there's room for all of us to thrive, not just to exist, but to thrive, because that's, after all, what we want. As for the differences that I have both ADHD and dyslexia myself, and I think both of those terms have been widely misunderstood, and unfortunately, stigmatized. Just to give you an idea of ADHD, you're all familiar with the PCR test, I'm sure, for COVID. I don't know how many of you know what PCR stands for, but it stands for polymerase chain reaction, which is a chemical test that is behind all the DNA identification, forensics, birth, you name it, all the stuff we use DNA to identify comes from this polymerase chain reaction. Well, that reaction was invented, synthesized, created, I don't know which is the right verb, by a man who had huge ADHD. His name was Kerry Mullis. He's since died and gone to heaven, but he won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for that discovery. And many people say, next to the double helix, it's the most important discovery in biology in the past 100 years. And he got a Nobel Prize for it. And he's got a very different brain, or had a very different brain. Believe me, you can read stories about him and you'll see what I mean. And he's just one of many. It's altogether likely that Thomas Edison, our great inventor, had it. The man who founded JetBlue Airlines, David Neeleman, he's since gone on to other airlines, but he's become a friend of mine because he has big time ADHD. And he's the man who invented the electronic ticket. And isn't it ironic that it's someone who has ADHD who thinks of a way for us to go to the airport and not have to remember to bring our ticket? He's also the man who came up with the idea of putting television sets in the back of the seat in front of you. Again, because people with ADD can't tolerate boredom. And so he came up with a way not to be bored on flights. So many people, so many inventors, innovators, creators have a different brain, and the pioneers, the disruptors in the best sense of that word, the visionaries, the dreamers, a lot of the people who colonized this country, and the American dream, is really the kind of thing people with ADD do. We are the dreamers, we are constantly thinking big, maybe sometimes too big, but we want to change the world. We're very mission driven, and often misunderstood as teachers, parents, and others want us to conform and, above all, quiet down. And we can be pretty rambunctious, particularly the boys who have the condition. The girls tend not to be as disruptive, which is why they often get overlooked. But what we need above all else in terms of, like I put it, unwrapping our gift. I don't treat disabilities. I help people of all ages unwrap their gift. And whether they have a diagnosable condition or not, that's the point of growing up, is to identify and unwrap and develop your gifts, your talents. That's what I do for a living. And in terms of doing that, I think the most important lesson I ever got was from my first grade teacher. I started off school in a little town on Cape Cod, on the elbow of Cape Cod, called Chatham. And I showed up for first grade in 1956 at the age of 6. And here I am, supposed to learn how to read, the fundamental task of first grade, learning how to read. And it became clear as the September became October and then November, that the other kids were catching on to phonics. They were able to sound out words, see, spot, run, and whatnot. And I just was not getting it. I was not able to decode, sound out, so on and so forth. Well, back then in the 1950s, in most places around the country, they didn't have anywhere near the sophisticated diagnostic capabilities we have today. There were basically 2 diagnoses, smart and stupid. And there was one treatment plan, try harder. And they might throw in some punishment and humiliation to, motivate you, to get you to try harder. And if that didn't work, well, you were very stupid. And that was the end of it. Most people, clunked along with that real primitive way of understanding differences when it comes to academic ability. Well, I was very lucky in my school. I had a first grade teacher who knew there was more to little boys and girls who couldn't read or learn to read than being stupid. And there were better ways to help them than to ridicule them or punish them. And now she had no formal training in reading or learning differences that I know of, except she'd been teaching first grade for about 70 years. She was this old lady with white curly hair. I can see her as if it were yesterday. She used to wear these navy blue satin dresses with apples on them. That's what I see her in, apples and blue, and short and round and spectacles and rosy red cheeks. And at reading period, we'd be sitting at these little round tables, us first graders, and we'd take turns reading out loud. And it would come to be my turn, and I couldn't do it. I would stammer, I would stutter. Well, Mrs. Eldridge would simply come over and sit down next to me. She'd pull out one of those little chairs and put her large self on the little chair. And as she would arrive, she was back in the old days when old ladies wore powder, remember that? And so she'd arrive like a sugar donut as she'd come over next to me and pull up her little chair, sprinkling this powder all around us. And there we'd sit in this little cloud, and she would proceed to put her arm around me and kind of hug me in next to her. And none of the other kids would laugh at me as I stammered and stuttered because I had the mafia sitting next to me. No one was going to mess with Mrs. Eldridge. And that was my treatment plan, was Mrs. Eldridge's arm. But it was absolutely brilliant. You see, with that arm, she took out of the equation what are the real learning disabilities. The ADD and dyslexia are traits. They're conditions that can be managed. In fact, they can be turned into superpowers. But the real disabling forces are shame and fear and believing you're stupid. And those get instilled if you don't have Mrs. Eldridge's arm around you. If you just leave it to the peers, if you just leave it to the zeitgeist, you'll quickly acquire those disabilities of shame and fear and believing you're stupid. You got to prevent that. And the best way to prevent that is with Mrs. Eldridge's arm. Make the learning environment safe. Fear is the true disability, not the conditions that I have and millions of us have. Get that arm around you. Well, with that arm, I looked forward to reading period. And that's pretty amazing to take a 6-year-old little boy and have him look forward to publicly demonstrating his incompetence every day, which is exactly what I did. I looked forward to reading period because I looked forward to that hug. Was I particularly, interested in learning to read? Well, I did want to learn to read because my great aunt read to me every day. And so to that extent, I did want to learn to read. So I tried, and Mrs. Eldridge wouldn't let me not. She wouldn't excuse me. She said, you just keep at it. You'll get there one of these days. And so I kept trying and not doing well. By the end of the year, I was the worst, still the worst reader in the class, but I was the most enthusiastic student of reading. And that's all because of Mrs. Eldridge. Well, that arm has stayed around me ever since. I've never been ashamed of the kind of brain I have, even though it is different. I have a different way of doing things. I am still to this day an incredibly slow reader. It takes me forever to get through a book. My wife says, I don't know how you know anything. It takes you so long to read. But I read well enough that I majored in English at Harvard College and graduated with high honors, and I've written 20 books. You know, so you can't do that if you can't use words or read words as well as write them. And none of that would have happened without that wonderful arm around me. Remember Mrs. Eldridge's arm and make sure it gets around your child, around yourself for that matter, where you do not acquire the terrible conditions of shame and fear and believing that you're stupid. By the way, I'm encouraging you to send in your questions, put them in the chat room, because I'd love to answer them, you know, when I finish talking. So let me just pause for a moment and introduce you to what ADHD is. First of all, the term attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a terrible term. It's not a deficit at all. We have an abundance of attention. And as I said, I've got the condition myself. We have an abundance of attention, and our challenge is to control it, but it's certainly not a deficit of attention. And as well, I don't see it as a disorder. I see it as a trait. And if you manage it right, it in fact can become a tremendous asset in your life. So the goal is not to normalize you, but rather to take this trait and turn it into an asset. So my job is to maximize the upside of this condition and minimize the downside. So most people are familiar with the downside, and they're not so familiar with the upside. Well, what's interesting about ADHD is the two are combined. You know, you can't take the chocolate out of the cake, and so the good is combined with the disadvantageous, and that's almost always the case in this condition. With every positive, you also find a negative, and with every negative, you also find a positive. Just look at the three main symptoms that define this condition. If you look in the DSM, the diagnostic manual, you'll find that ADHD is defined in terms of two axes of symptoms. And the first axis is the axis of inattention, and you have 9 symptoms related to that. And the second axis is the axis of impulsivity and hyperactivity. And you have 6 symptoms related to impulsivity and 3 symptoms related to hyperactivity. And that's it. And to diagnose ADD, you have to have 6 out of 9 symptoms in either one of the axes, the axis of inattention or the axis of impulsivity and hyperactivity. If you have 6 out of 9 and it's causing you problems and it occurs in 2 or more settings, by definition, you have ADHD. People make it sound a lot more complicated, but that's it. The condition itself is far more complicated than simply 6 symptoms, but the 6 symptoms define it in terms of whether you have it or not. The condition is wonderfully complicated. It's wonderfully rich, wonderfully fascinating. I'm still learning about it, and I'm 72 years old. I've had it my whole life. I've treated thousands of people who have it, and I'm still learning about it. It's a really fascinating condition, and it's a good news diagnosis, because once you find out that you have it, things can only get better. Doesn't matter whether you're 6 years old or 60 years old. Never too late, it's a wonderful condition and to treat, because you almost always see improvement. But I was talking about those three symptoms that define the condition. And notice how each one of them is negative: distractibility, impulsivity, hyperactivity. Well, think about it now. Take each one of those and turn it on its head. And let me show you how you get a positive. Distractibility. What's so good about that? Well, the flip side of distractibility is curiosity. If you didn't care what was making that noise, if you didn't care where that odor came from, if you didn't care what's under that rock, you'd ignore it. But we gotta find out. We are driven by curiosity. We are absolutely driven by curiosity. That's what motivates us. That's what enlivens us. We're on a lifelong search for who knows what, but we are the curious ones. And curiosity, let's face it, is what leads to discovery. It's what leads to invention. It's what leads to all kinds of wonderful things. It can also get you into trouble. You know, if you stick your nose where it shouldn't be, you can get into trouble, and we can indeed be nosy. And I'm in the profession of being nosy. I'm a psychiatrist, you know, and so my curiosity is an asset, but it you know, so that's the first one, the flip side of distractibility. Now, impulsivity. Okay, this is the one that gets people into trouble. You're so impulsive. And indeed, my analogy for ADD, that you have a Ferrari engine for a brain with bicycle brakes, is basically about that, the power of your mind, particularly your imagination, is too much for your braking power to contain. So a lot of my work with people is helping them strengthen their brakes so they can have more control over their thoughts, their actions, their feelings, their impulses, you know. And a Ferrari with no brakes is a pretty dangerous car, but a Ferrari with good brakes wins races. And that's what these kids need to understand, that you're in the process of becoming a champion race car brain, not just an ordinary chugging along kind of brain. So impulsivity, what's good about impulsivity? Isn't that really bad? And doesn't that lead to bad decisions and reckless decisions and getting in trouble with all kinds of people and places? Well, yes, it can do that. But on the other hand, think about creativity for a minute. What is creativity but impulsivity gone right? You don't plan to have a new idea. You don't say, well, it's now, 5:30, time for my earth-shattering new idea. No, that's not how it works. These new ideas pop. They come in the middle of taking a shower. They come in the middle of a boring meeting. They come in the middle of a traffic jam as you're driving to wherever you're driving to. They pop. They come impulsively. If you're not somewhat disinhibited, if you're not somewhat open to whatever is new, if you're not somewhat enlivened, by the new and the exciting, your brain won't let it in. And that's what people who are not terribly imaginative, that's what they do. They exclude. As something bubbles up from their unconscious, their sensor sees it and say, irrelevant, stupid, boring, they exclude it. Whereas we have a far more permissive gatekeeper, if we even have a gatekeeper at all. As the idea bubbles up from your unconscious, you let it in and you say, come on in, look around, see what, if you find anyone else here. And most of these new ideas, these bright new ideas, prove to be useless, but a few of them prove to be very valuable. And that's where the Nobel Prizes come from. That's where someone thinking of a solution to how to change that light bulb in the ceiling that no one can reach. I mean, that's the kind of everyday new idea that we come up with that's useful. We are the creatives. There's no doubt about it. And the reason is the positive side of impulsivity, that we allow the new, the different, the forbidden to pop into consciousness and actually get examined, get considered, and maybe even tried out. And so there you have, so the flip side of distractibility is curiosity. The flip side of impulsivity is creativity. Now, what about hyperactivity? What could possibly be good about that? Well, you get to be my age, I'm 72, it's called energy. And I'm really glad to have this little turbo pack on my back. I'm really glad that I can, zoom around and, do more things than, than your average 72-year-old. But, and that's because ever since I was a little boy, I've had more than my fair share of energy. As a little boy, I was so curious, they called me the question box, so, and then the creativity part, well, yeah, I've got that. My creativity tends to come out in writing. But that's what you want to always be looking with these children, and the adults for that matter. You want to be looking for talents, not just trying to help rectify problems, things that they're bad at. These kids get so much remediation, they begin to feel like they're just a walking problem. And the part that gets ignored is the self-esteem element. And that's such an important part. You really need to, you really need to take that seriously. And a good way to do that is simply to follow their interest, look where interest leads them, anywhere but video games, but follow their interest. And I wrote an essay a couple of weeks ago saying the purpose of education is to fall in love with a person, sure, but more important, with a subject, with an activity, with a sport, with a musical instrument, with a food, with a place on the shore, with a tree, with a favorite hangout, with a restaurant, with a cuisine, with, the more you can fall in love, particularly while you're growing up, the richer your life will be. Because for most of us, we are happy in direct and fulfilled in direct proportion to the number and depths of our loves. The number and depths of our loves. That's where you want to, become rich while you're growing up. Rich in the number of your loves, your love of bicycling, your love of drawing, your love of baseball, your love of sewing, your love of tuning up a race car, like your brain. But that's what makes a life. I fell in love with writing when I was in high school at Exeter, and I had a 12th grade teacher who encouraged me and mentored me, and he got me to write a novel in the 12th grade. Never got published, but it was a novel and it won the senior English prize, and that changed my life. That changed my life. But not only did it help me to fall in love with writing, but it showed me that I could do something that I would have thought was impossible. And that's something else you want to try to help every child, but particularly kids who struggle in other areas. Try to find something where they can really do the impossible. Try to find something where set the goal very high, far from accommodating and lowering expectations. We tend to do better when you raise expectations, not as a requirement. That novel that I wrote was completely optional. Not as a requirement, but as a kind of challenge and setting the bar high. And once you do that, once you show to yourself that you can do that, you become hooked on trying to do the impossible. I've been trying to do the impossible ever since. I usually fail, but sometimes I succeed, and that's great. But the real win is not the success or failure. And I think of Kipling's poem "If" with the great line, "If you can look at triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same." It's written on the tunnel leading out from the locker room to center court at Wimbledon. If you can look at triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same. Because the real hero of the piece is not the victory or the defeat. The real sustaining passion is love of the game. And that really is, as long as you're in the game, your wins and losses, they will come. There's nothing you can do in life where you're not going to have wins and losses. They will come. But you want to see them each as imposters, because the real hero, the real goal, the real reward is the love of the game. And as long as you have a love of the game, you're always going to be motivated. You're always going to be alive. You're always going to be participating, and you'll be resilient. You'll be able to deal with defeat when it comes. You'll be able to deal with the crushing disappointment of as well as you'll be able to deal in a useful way with tremendous victory. You won't let it go to your head too much any more than you'll let the defeat bring you down. And a lot of these kids we're talking about today encounter a lot of disappointment and a lot of defeat and a lot of quote unquote failure on tests and whatnot. So you want to make sure they have a love of the game, that there's some place where they feel excited to be there. It may be a sport, it may be a hobby, it may be a musical instrument, it may be cooking in the kitchen, it may be making pasta. I had one kid who's made the most wonderful pasta you've ever had in your life. But you want to help them fall in love. They don't have to develop a passion necessarily. I think that term gets overdone a little bit, but fall in love. Have as many and as deep loves as you possibly can, and that will make for the best sort of foundation you can ever have in life. And falling in love knows no learning difference boundary, knows no score on your SAT boundary, knows no A, B, C, or D kind of thing. Falling in love is blind to all of that. Anybody can fall in love anywhere, anytime, with anything. And if only we could encourage that and help kids really just go at life with gusto and enthusiasm and put aside their self-consciousness and just, fall in love. I mean, that's the best thing you can do. If you want to, get on with a wonderful life. Of course, you need that arm around you. You need Mrs. Eldridge's arm around you if you're going to feel confident enough and safe enough to fall in love. If you're feeling afraid and anxious, as a lot of kids are because they're afraid they're going to mess up, get something wrong, be called out, then it's very hard to fall in love. It's very hard to be anxious and fall in love at the same time, or to be fearful. You can be anxious. We're all anxious, when we're around things we love. But you if you're fear-filled, that can shut you down, and so you don't proceed as creatively and boldly as you otherwise could. The take-home point here, and then I'm going to open for questions, is really, I said at the beginning, no brain is the same, no brain is the best. Each brain finds its own special way. And with tremendous optimism, but also an attitude of excitement and curiosity, you want to help each child find his or her own special way. My most recent book, ADHD 2.0, I get into the latest interventions that can make a difference, some involving medication, some not. And there's real important new neuroscience in that book. You also might want to visit my new podcast called Dr. Hallowell's Wonderful World of Different. So it's all about differences and on a broader sense, but Dr. Hallowell's Wonderful World of Different. I invite you to listen to my podcast, and I'd love to hear from you about it. Well, why don't I pause there and turn to your questions. Is this okay, Elaine?
Yeah, this is beyond okay. This is spectacular. And Dr. Hallowell, I know there are so many comments that have come through, but I've heard you speak many times. Each time it's like a magical re-engagement with possibility. And I am so inspired, and I know everyone else is. I'm going to cut to the questions, but
well, thank you, Elaine. I really, that's really.
You're starting with, the innovators, the creators, the disruptors, and I am just hoping that our kids have a Mrs. Eldridge in their life, because the magic, we all know this, the magic of a teacher and what that can impart on us for life. So thank you for that. So first quick question is, what's the name of the book you wrote for your daughter?
It's called A Walk in the Rain with a Brain.
Oh, awesome.
And it's still available. It came out, when she was about 6, so that would have been about 1995. And yeah, no, it's about a little girl who goes out in the rain one day and finds a brain. And the brain says, can you help me find my way back to my head? I've lost my head. And Lucy, the name of the little girl, says, sure, I can help you. But while we're going to find your head, could you answer me one question, brain? And the brain says, sure, what? And she says, could you please make me smart? And the brain says, you're already smart. You just need to find out at what. And then it goes on as a dialogue. And then it ends up with no brain is the same, no brain is the best. Each brain finds its own special way.
Amazing.
Lucy's now, by the way, Lucy is now 32. And she's a senior executive at the National Football League. Works on advertising and Super Bowl commercials and that kind of stuff.
Amazing. You know, I need to pause for 1 second because we are going to put a poll up very quickly so that we can get a feel for where people are signed in from. So if everybody wouldn't mind just jumping in, and which publication did you register for the event from? That would be great. And then I'll continue with the questions with Dr. Hallowell. Hold on 1 second. So Dr. Hallowell, there are a large number of questions around using medication, the necessity, how essential is it for treatment? When do you know it's right? So if you could just focus a little bit on all the questions related to the use of medication, age appropriateness, that would be great.
Sure. People often ask me, do you believe in medication? And my answer is, it's not a religious principle. You know, it's a medication. It's not an act of faith. It's an act of science. And these meds have been very extensively studied, probably more than any other medication used in psychiatry. The first use of stimulant medication dates way back to 1937. Most people don't realize that it's that long. We have like 80 years of experience with these meds. And so nothing lasts that long unless it is both safe and effective. Does it always work? Absolutely not. And medication is just one tool in the toolbox. It's not necessary. The only necessary tool in the toolbox is education. You really need to learn what these conditions are and what they're not if you want to serve your child or yourself best. But medications are a powerful tool. When they work about 80% of the time, what they do is help you focus. They do what my eyeglasses do. They help you focus, and they work only for as long as they're in your system, which varies from a matter of 3 or 4 hours to as many as 10 hours. There should be my standard is there should be no side effects other than appetite suppression without unwanted weight loss. You almost always do get appetite suppression, but you don't want to start losing a lot of weight. So you got to weigh yourself now and then. And then the other two numbers that are important to follow are your heart rate and your blood pressure, because stimulant medication can elevate heart rate and can elevate blood pressure. So you want to make sure that you follow those and that you're seen by your doctor, because you know these are potentially dangerous medications. If you misuse them, they can be bad. If you have side effects, they can be bad. You know, and the internet is full of such stories of people misusing, overdosing, you know, redirecting, selling on the street, all of that kind of stuff. And those are all misuses that we need to educate people against. But just because they can be misused doesn't mean you want to disregard them altogether. And when they work, they're an absolute godsend. I've been prescribing now for, well, since I first learned about this. The first child I ever put on stimulant medication was in 1981. And his IQ went from 69 when he was tested on admission to 140 after he got on stimulant medication. I've never seen that kind of an increase since then, but it's indicative of how things like IQ are really influenced by focus and attention. If you can't focus on the test, you're not going to do nearly as well. So that was the first little boy. I put him on Ritalin, and I was amazed. I was absolutely amazed. And I've continued to be amazed ever since. But the trick is, number one, to know that you don't have to do it. But number two, there's no reason not to give it a try unless it's against your religion. There's no reason not to give it a try because the potential benefit is huge. And the risk is virtually nil as long as you're in the hands of a doctor who knows what he's doing. People say, will it take away my special sauce? Will it take away my kid's creativity? No, but if it did, you just stop the medication. I mean, whatever it does, if you turn purple, you just stop the medication and you'll go back to your regular color. So all the side effects are reversible simply by stopping the medication. So there's no reason not to give it a try. If you try it and you like it and it doesn't cause side effects, keep taking it. Question comes up, how long do I have to keep taking it? You don't have to keep taking it more than a day. My daughter has been taking it since she was in the 5th grade and she's now 32 years old. And an executive at the National Football League, works on advertising, whatnot. So you're not committing yourself to anything long-term, but as with eyeglasses, a lot of people who get started on them and get a good result want to keep taking it. But it's not like an antibiotic. You don't have to maintain a blood level. It's not like the SSRIs, the serotonin active antidepressants, where it's very hard to get off of it once you get on it. These are pretty much analogous with coffee. Only if you stop coffee abruptly, you get a wicked headache, but that doesn't happen with stimulant medication. And as I say, when it works, it simply increases focus and no side effects other than cutting your appetite without weight loss is my standard. And as I say, that's achievable usually about 80% of the time.
Great. One question, people commenting, they appreciate your positivity, but as an adult with ADD and dyslexia, it feels like the more stress, the worse it gets, and they haven't really found how to turn this into an asset.
Yeah, it can be tough, and stress in today's world, we're also dealing with isolation. We don't have the supports that we should have and that we need. And, today's world is very difficult for everybody, but particularly if you have ADHD. Most of us who have it would be doing better if we could manage this condition more effectively. So learn as much as you can. There's a lot of new nuggets in my new book, ADHD 2.0, but there are many websites, many places you can go, and there are chat rooms and forums, and there's a lot to be learned in those places, people sharing little tricks, what works for them. Another thing that you can try, aside from medication and education, is getting a coach. And ADHD coaches, both, for children, the coach is usually de facto mom, but there comes an age for mom where the nag factor starts to get in the way, and that's where you might want to get a coach. And then for adults, the same thing. And there are coach resources. If you go to Attitude Magazine, they have a coach clearinghouse. I think that's Attitude, ADDITUDE magazine. And then David Work runs a coaching academy called Coach Academy, I think is the name of it. His name is Gwirk, GWIRC. And if you just Google ADD coaching, that'll come up also. So that's another nice way of adding to the unwrapping of your gift.
There's a couple questions with curiosity around brain exercises and how schools are using those, helping with distraction. Do you have an opinion about rewiring the brain by trying to use these?
Well, actually, physical exercise is the best one. And in chapter 3 of my new book, I talk about stimulating the cerebellum. And this is based on research that's just come out of Mass General Hospital. Jeremy Schmalman showed that there are rich connections from the cerebellum, which is a clump of neurons at the base and back of the brain, richly connected to the frontal lobes, which is where the action is in ADD. And it turns out by stimulating the cerebellum through physical exercises that challenge balance, the role of the cerebellum is to regulate balance. So if you challenge balance, like standing on one leg, or standing on one leg with your eyes closed, or standing on a wobble board, or sitting on an exercise ball with your legs off the floor, if you challenge balance, It turns out, amazingly enough, and you do these exercises for 5 minutes twice a day, you'll get again, about 80% of the time, significant changes in the areas of the brain that have to do with ADD, emotion control, and executive function. So 5 minutes, 10 minutes twice, 5 minutes twice a day. And the program that offers this is called the Zing program, Z-I-N-G. So if you Google that, you'll learn about it, or in my new book. So, and then the other thing is just physical exercise in general. There are the cerebellar stimulation exercises that are specific to this, but then physical exercise in general. And my buddy and partner John Rady wrote a classic book on this called Spark, the revolutionary new science of exercise in the brain. And it shows how incredibly good exercise in general is, not just for your body, but for your brain, and showed increase in SAT scores, increase in grades, increase in mood stability, all the things that you'd hope for, you get as a result of regular physical exercise. So don't hold kids in for recess. Big mistake. Let them run around. And if you want to give them a consequence, have them wash cars or rake leaves or something like that. But don't have them sit in chairs staring at the wall.
Perfect. What are some of the key signs of dyslexia to watch for if a parent suspects that a child is slightly dyslexic?
Basically, slow to read and spell your native language. That's it in a nutshell. If you're slow to read and spell your native language as compared to your peers. And the sooner you get on dyslexia, the better, because the treatments are not medication, it's specialized forms of tutoring. Wilson method, Lindemood Bell, Orton Gillingham, those are all, they're usually multi-sensory ways of learning to overcome dyslexia. And remember, dyslexia, like ADHD, has gifts packed into it as well. So you also, as you're helping them learn how to read and develop fluency, you also want to be on the lookout for what interests might they have, what are their, whatever, no matter how off the wall or offbeat, pursue it. Interest is by definition good. And you want to encourage that, feed that. I call it loves, as many loves as you can develop. They will feed you, and as you feed them. But that's what dyslexia is: slow to read and spell your native language. I've never made much improvement in mine. I'm really an incredibly slow reader. But like I said, I couldn't have majored in English at Harvard and graduated with high honors if I weren't a halfway decent reader, and so it can slow you down, but it doesn't have to hold you up.
Now there are a bunch of questions teen focused. I think some of the answers are, they're just being teens, ornery, agitated, but there are specific questions around, teens coming off their meds or being just irreverent about taking it and sporadic. So any good coaching for parents of teens?
Yeah, I tend to, when it comes to meds, have the person taking the meds be in charge. But then my job as the doctor is to coach them on what usually works best is if you get into a steady routine. And if you don't want to, then it's my job to find out why. And it's usually some side effect that they haven't mentioned. They're afraid that it'll interfere with their charisma or their special sauce or their, sex appeal or whatever it might happen to be. They have something that they're not wanting to share with you, that they're worried that the medication will take away from them. And if you can just give them the knowledge that if it does anything you don't like, anything, I will change the dose or stop the medication, then, you want to work with them so they get to a place where they want to take the medication. Because if it's working, you will want to take it. And the reason for not wanting to take it is it's doing something, or you fear it might do something that, that usually I can help them dispel that fear. The goal is regular dose, regular medication on a consistent basis. That leads to the best results.
Great. Could you talk a little bit about administrator teachers wanting kids to repeat, for instance, the 4th grade, the benefits and the negatives to that?
I'm a huge advocate. I'm a huge fan of repeating grades early on, and later on, for that matter. Both of my sons repeated 8th grade when they went from one school to another. But younger grades, it's even easier. The kids with ADHD tend to be socially immature, so they could use another year. And the worry about friends, you do make new friends is the simple answer. So you want to coach them through. You're not being held back as a punishment. You're being held back as a opportunity to make more friends and sort of catch up socially. And you don't have to have a real long discussion about it. You just sort of, this is what we're going to do. And most of the time that'll carry the day. I think it's a great idea for these kids to have a chance to repeat a grade.
That on the other side of the spectrum, this is a question about a person's daughter who wasn't diagnosed until she was 17, ADHD, and was granted accommodations in high school and is now, looking towards college. And if you have any recommendations or insights on that process and what kids can benefit.
Applying to college?
Yeah.
Yeah, go to the college you want to go to. Apply to the colleges you want to go to. Unless you have really challenging ADHD, in which case Landmark College is the best out there. They really specialize in different learners. And Curry College in Milton, near where I live. But most people with ADHD do not need a special college. Just go to a college where you want to go there. You like the city, you like the program, you like what they have to offer. And then you can turn it into an ADD friendly environment, mainly by getting a coach, in which you can hire a graduate student to be your coach. I mean, you don't have to have necessarily a ADHD coach, but don't think you have to have a specialized school. And also don't think you have to go to some prestige school. That's it. It's not the prestige of the school that confers the benefit. It's what you do when you get there. So try to dispel that.
That's great. I'm gonna make this our last question. There's many series of questions related to screens and screen time, and this is a hyper moment where kids are being impacted. So turning that one over to you.
Well, screens are like ice cream. Some is great, too much is bad. And it's up to you to decide how much is too much. I think an hour a day, maybe 2 hours a day. But it's not only the amount, it's also the content. And I have a friend who wrote really the definitive book. It's called Slaying Digital Dragons by Alex Packer. It just came out. Tips and tools for protecting your body, brain, psyche, and thumbs from the digital dark side. And he goes into the dangers. So as a parent, if you read this, you'll be scared you'll be scared to death. But it's all real, and the more you know, the better you can deal with it. So you might consider getting Slaying Digital Dragons. But not to minimize the upside. I mean, we wouldn't be doing this today if it weren't for digital. And my life as a writer was dramatically changed when I went from typing, on an old-fashioned typewriter to word processing. I mean, what a difference! It's just incredible difference. So, again, celebrate the difference and learn the danger. And because the danger is, it's a real thing. Screen addiction is very real, not to mention the content, getting into trouble, cyberbullying is horrible. And the sexual liaisons that get created and the predators that are out there, it's a open hunting season for these folks. And so you want to be aware of the dangers, but also exploit the benefits, because used right, this stuff is an incredible magical wand. Well,
On that note, I can't thank you enough for joining us, and also thanking all of our sponsors and media partners around the country. I know we'll ask you to join us again. We hope that people that are tuned in will consider joining us in February. We have a talk called Bias Interruptus. Supporting Anti-Bias Education at Home and in School with Dr. Scotland Nash. And then we have Living Like a Citizen, Raising Leaders in a Complicated World with Eric Liu, who's the co-founder and CEO of Citizen University, and that will be part of our camp fair. So thank you all for joining us, especially Dr. Hallowell, for your wisdom and encouragement. And we hope you have a good evening.
Thank you. You too. Thanks for, oh, by the way, if you want to reach me, just go to my website, drhallowell.com, drhallowell.com. I'd love to hear from you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.